I always believed surprises were love's simplest language. Little gestures, small interruptions in routine, moments meant to say, "I'm thinking of you even when you're far away." That was the spirit I clung to as I steered Marcus's SUV along the narrowing forest road, the pre-dawn cold fogging the windshield. The idea had come to me only 3 nights ago. Show up at his yearly fishing retreat, unannounced, smiling, wrapped in his favorite navy coat, and remind us both that we were still capable of being close. Still capable of being partners. But the closer I drove to the cabin, the more that warm image felt like something borrowed, like a memory from a life that wasn't mine anymore. The air outside carried the sharpness of winter's early warning. Pines swayed in tired shapes, and the gravel crackled beneath the tires as if irritated by my intrusion. I tightened my hands on the steering wheel. "This is good," I whispered to myself. "He'll be happy. He'll be surprised." My voice sounded small. For a moment, I imagined his expression when I walked through the cabin door. Marcus Ward, billionaire investor, the man who always appeared unshaken in boardrooms, finally caught off guard by something tender. I pictured him setting down his fishing mug, smiling in that deep way he used to, before the tension, before the secrecy, before the constant travel that no longer felt like work. But as the sky shifted from dark blue to gray, another thought surfaced, quiet and unwelcome. Then why did he look so relieved when he left this time? 3 days ago, he'd kissed me goodbye with the kind of distracted affection a person gives a stranger they're trying not to offend. No warmth. No hesitation. No spark. Just a practiced gesture, like shaking hands with someone at a networking event. The steering wheel trembled. Or maybe it was my grip. I pushed the memory aside and focused on the road ahead. A low mist clung to the lake as it came into view, a silver sheet of water stretching beyond the trees. The cabin sat at the far edge, partially hidden, wooden, charming, and usually comforting. Yet this morning, something about it looked still. Too still. As I turned down the final slope, my heart began to beat harder. I tried to convince myself it was excitement, anticipation, the sweetness of doing something unexpected. But beneath my ribs, it didn't feel sweet. It felt like warning. The air grew colder the moment I stepped out of the car. A thin frost coated the grass, crunching beneath my boots. The silence was heavy, like the world was holding its breath, as if the forest had been waiting for me, not in welcome but in caution. I stood in the clearing and let myself breathe. The lake glittered dully behind the cabin. Marcus had always described this place as his reset button, where the noise of money and business couldn't reach him, where he could think, where he could breathe. But as I started walking toward the door, a familiar unease crept up my spine. His boat was already docked. That wasn't unusual. He hated delaying his morning routine, but the lamp inside the cabin was still glowing, a soft gold against the chilly blue dawn. Marcus never left lights on. Not here. Not anywhere. I stopped halfway up the porch steps, feeling a sting of confusion, followed quickly by something sharper. "He must have forgotten," I whispered, though the explanation fell flat even to my own ears. Marcus didn't forget things. He remembered everything, especially the details that made people trust him. I rested my hand on the doorknob, cold metal biting into my palm. For the first time since leaving the city, I hesitated. What if he wasn't alone? The thought flickered, thin as a spark, but it burned quickly. Deeply. I shook my head. Marcus wasn't perfect, but he wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless enough to bring someone else here. Not to his sanctuary. Not to the one place he said he needed for himself. Something in the air felt off. I took a deep breath, turned the knob slowly, and stepped inside. Whatever I expected, the warmth of his smile, his voice calling my name, it wasn't what greeted me. Instead, a peculiar scent drifted through the room. Expensive. Not mine. And just like that, the surprise that should have been sweet tasted like fear. The moment I stepped inside, the scent hit me again. Sweet, floral, expensive. Not the earthy sandalwood cologne Marcus used, not the cedar from the old wooden beams, but something softer. Feminine. Foreign to the cabin and foreign to our marriage. My fingers tightened around the doorframe as the cold from outside slipped in behind me. For a second, I simply stood there, listening. The cabin hummed with a faint mechanical warmth. The radiators were still buzzing, meaning Marcus had been inside minutes, not hours, before I arrived. He always turned them off when he left. Wasted heat is wasted money, he'd say with that half-smirk he wore when lecturing someone. But the warmth lingering here wasn't comforting. It was suspicious. I took a slow step forward, my boots brushing against the old rug he bought from an artisan in Norway. His sentimental prize, he called it. Now it felt like I was stepping on a lie. My gaze slid to the small wooden coffee table near the window. 2 wine glasses. Not dusty. Not leftover from some earlier night. Fresh. 1 glass half full. The other holding the faintest smear of pink lipstick along the rim. My stomach twisted. I'd packed a bottle of Chablis in the car, thinking we could share a glass together, laugh about how silly and impulsive I was for surprising him. But he'd already opened something. And he hadn't been drinking alone. A breeze slipped through the cracked kitchen window, stirring a pale blue fabric lying on the back of a chair. I walked toward it, each step heavier than the last. When I lifted the material between my fingers, the realization pierced me. A scarf. Delicate. Far too elegant to be mine. And somehow, even colder than the air around it. I pressed the fabric between my palms, waiting for the familiar denial to kick in, the mental gymnastics every spouse has rehearsed at least once. Maybe it's old. Maybe a guest forgot it. Maybe I'm overreacting. But the perfume clinging to the scarf, the warm wine glasses, the still humming radiators, everything whispered the truth I didn't want to face. Someone else had been here last night. Someone close enough to share a private evening with my husband. I forced myself to breathe, slow and uneven. The cabin blurred for a moment as tears threatened to rise, but I blinked them back. Crying felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to surrender to anything yet. Not to fear, not to anger, and definitely not to Marcus's secrets. I moved toward the bedroom hallway, my boots falling softer now as if I feared waking a ghost. The air shifted slightly, carrying not just perfume, but something else. Something metallic, like a faint trace of cologne mixed with lake water. Marcus's jacket. He must have worn it recently. I paused at the end of the hall. His fishing hat was hanging crookedly. He never left it like that. Marcus's habits were carved into stone, unchanging, predictable, almost ritualistic. But either he had rushed out, or he hadn't been the one to hang it at all. The thought chilled me more than the icy dawn outside. I stepped back into the living room, needing space, needing air that wasn't heavy with someone else's presence. The window gave me a view of the dock, where the luxury boat bobbed gently. Too gently. The rope securing it was damp, freshly knotted. He had gone out this morning. But with who? A shiver crawled up my spine, slow and deliberate. I set the scarf down carefully, as if touching it too long might burn me. Then I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out my phone. No signal, of course. The woods were notorious for dead zones. I turned back toward the door, instinct pushing me to step outside and breathe, to escape the suffocating evidence around me. But before I could move, a faint sound drifted from somewhere beyond the cabin walls, distant, muffled, like voices carried by the wind. One voice low. Another sharper. A woman. My heartbeat jumped. Marcus wasn't alone on the lake. And whoever was with him hadn't left yet. The voices drifted again, faint, broken by the wind, but unmistakably human. My breath caught. I moved toward the door before fear could stop me, slipping outside and letting the cold air bite my cheeks awake. The lake stretched out gray and restless, the mist shifting like it was hiding something beneath its surface. I stepped onto the damp earth, scanning the shoreline. Something dark pressed into the mud near the water's edge. I crouched, brushing my fingers lightly across the imprint. A boot. Heavy. The tread was sharp and familiar. Marcus's outdoor pair he kept strictly at the cabin. But right beside it, overlaying parts of the print, were smaller ones. Barely half the size. Narrow. The heel lighter, the toe sinking deeper, as if the person had been walking fast or stumbling. A woman's footprint. The panic I'd been trying to restrain surged forward. My pulse thudded painfully against my ribs as I followed the prints along the shoreline. The mud squished beneath my boots, and the wind picked up, pushing ripples across the lake like a warning I was too stubborn to heed. The footprints led toward the woods behind the cabin. The trees stood tall and crowded together, dark enough that the morning light seemed to hesitate at the entrance. I hesitated too. But the memory of the 2 wine glasses, of the lipstick smear, of the feminine perfume clinging to the scarf, I couldn't turn back. Not now. I stepped into the treeline, the cold shadows swallowing the last of the soft daylight behind me. The ground here was uneven, covered with damp leaves and scattered rocks. The boot prints were spaced out, purposeful, while the smaller ones wavered, shifted, occasionally dragging as if the woman had been trying to keep her balance. A branch snapped somewhere ahead. Then a voice, low, sharp, unmistakably Marcus's. "What were you thinking bringing that out here?" My chest tightened. I slid behind a fallen tree trunk, pressing myself low, barely breathing. The argument was clearer now, filtered through the branches. A second voice, trembling. "I told you, I didn't mean to. I wanted to protect myself." Marcus's response was immediate, a hiss of anger slicing through the morning air. "You don't protect yourself from me. You listen to me." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the entire forest had frozen. I didn't dare move. My fingers curled into the moss beneath me, grounding me against the instinct to run screaming back to the cabin. Then the woman spoke again, softer this time. "Marcus, please. I didn't show anyone. I swear. I deleted everything." My heart twisted. Deleted what? Recorded what? And why was my husband speaking to her like a threat rather than a companion? I lifted myself just enough to see between the branches. The clearing ahead opened onto a narrow slope leading down toward the far edge of the lake. 2 figures stood near the water, Marcus, rigid and furious, and the woman, younger, frightened, her hands raised slightly as if trying to calm a wild animal. I couldn't make out her face clearly, but the scarf in the cabin flashed in my mind. Marcus stepped closer to her, his tone dropping into something colder. "You think you can walk away now? After everything you've heard? Everything you've seen?" She shook her head quickly, backing up a step. "I won't tell anyone. I promise. I shouldn't have recorded anything. It's gone, Marcus, it's gone." A recording. My throat tightened. What the hell had my husband gotten himself into? I sank lower, forcing my breath to steady as the realization settled like ice in my bloodstream. Marcus wasn't just hiding another woman. He was hiding something much darker, something worth threatening her over. The woman stumbled again, the heel of her shoe catching on a rock. Marcus reached for her, not gently, not in concern, but with a grip meant to control. A sharp whimper escaped her lips. And in that moment, I understood one horrifying truth. She wasn't safe with him. And neither was I. From my hiding place behind the fallen tree, the woman's face finally shifted into full view as the wind lifted her hair. My breath hitched. I knew her. Not personally, not socially, but from photographs, brief meetings in hallways, and the occasional polite greeting exchanged during company events. Lydia Hale. 24. Marcus's newest personal assistant. Pretty, soft-spoken, fresh out of some competitive internship program. The kind of person Marcus claimed he hired for her sharp mind, though now, watching her tremble in front of him, I realized he might have valued something else entirely. Her arms were wrapped around herself, as if trying to shield her shaking. Marcus towered over her, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched with the cold anger I had seen only twice in our marriage, and never directed at me like this. "Lydia," he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut bark from a tree, "you don't understand the severity of what you've done." "I said I deleted it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I panicked, Marcus. I never meant to." "You recorded me," he snapped. "That is a betrayal. Do you know what that means in my world?" My world. The words hit me harder than the cold ground beneath me. When had he started using that phrase? And why did it sound like my world was something I had never truly been part of? Lydia took another unsteady step back, her boots sinking into the wet soil. "I didn't show anyone. I swear. It was just for protection. You were yelling that night and I got scared." Her voice faltered. I needed something to defend myself if... Marcus laughed. Not loudly. Not humorously. A small, cruel exhale. You think you need protection from me? Lydia, I've done everything for you. Everything. And this is how you repay me. The shock spreading through my body was almost physical, crawling up my spine like frost. Marcus wasn't just angry, he was unrecognizable. This version of him, this coldness, this menace, it was someone I had only glimpsed in shadows of arguments, in evasive answers, in long nights where he chose silence over honesty. The secretive phone calls. The unexplained trips. The remote cabin visits he insisted were for clarity. Pieces of a puzzle I had refused to assemble. Lydia wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I thought you cared, she whispered, and her voice carried a grief that felt too personal. Too intimate. Too familiar. My stomach nodded. Marcus moved toward her, slow and deliberate. Of course I care. But caring doesn't excuse stupidity. His tone shifted, becoming coaxing in a way that felt rehearsed. You just have to listen to me. You have to trust me. Give me the phone. Her hand flinched toward her coat pocket instinctively. Marcus saw it. And for one terrifying second, I thought he would grab her. Instead, she tightened her grip around something small, the shape of a phone, no doubt, but didn't pull it out. I don't have it anymore, she whispered. I threw it away. His eyes narrowed. You're lying. I'm not. I swear. You're lying. His voice boomed across the lake, echoing off the water, vibrating through the forest floor. I ducked lower, heart slamming against my ribs. Lydia stumbled backward, shock spreading across her face like blooming bruises. My fingertips dug into the moss. How long had this been happening? How long had Marcus been manipulating her like he once manipulated me? Gentle words, small criticisms, tiny cuts disguised as concern. Lydia steadied herself, her breath fogging in the cold air. I didn't come here to fight, she said softly. I came to tell you the truth, because I didn't want things to get worse. Marcus stepped even closer. Too close. Things only get worse when people disobey me. The threat hung there, sharp and undeniable. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way I felt deep in my bones. The image of Marcus as my husband, my partner, my anchor shattered with each word he spat at her. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't infidelity. This was something darker. Something dangerous. And whatever Lydia had recorded, Marcus was terrified of it. A gust of wind rushed through the trees, scattering leaves and breaking the tension for a moment. Lydia looked toward the far trail, as if searching for an escape. Marcus noticed. His hand shot out, not yet touching her, but close enough to make her freeze. You're not going anywhere, he said. And in that moment I knew the truth. Chapter 5 would not be about a marriage breaking. It would be about survival. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Lydia stood trembling at the edge of the water, looking like a cornered animal, while Marcus loomed over her with the rigid control of a man whose entire identity depended on dominance. The lake behind them shifted in slow, restless waves, as if waiting for something to fall into it. I pressed my body deeper into the shadows of the fallen tree, my pulse thundering in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to pretend I had never seen any of this. But my feet remained cemented to the earth. Lydia swallowed hard and lifted her chin. Marcus, please just listen. The recording, it wasn't meant to expose you. It was meant to protect me. His face twisted. You're not the one who needs protection. Yes, I am, she whispered. You threatened me that night. You said if I ever repeated a word you told me about the offshore accounts. Stop. His voice cracked like a whip. But Lydia didn't stop. You said no one could ever know. The embezzling, the forced NDAs, the investors you kept in line by scaring them. Marcus, I couldn't just ignore all of that. My chest tightened so violently I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Offshore accounts? Embezzling? Forced NDAs? This wasn't infidelity. This was criminal. And my husband, my brilliant, polished, well-connected husband, was at the center of it. Marcus stepped closer, jaw rigid. You misunderstood everything. You recorded a conversation you weren't supposed to hear, and now you're twisting it into something that could destroy both of us. Destroy you, Lydia corrected softly. Not me. I was just trying to protect myself. Marcus's eyes went cold. There is no yourself in this situation. You belong to this company. You signed the contract. It wasn't a real contract, she said, voice trembling. You forced me. He lunged. Not a strike, not yet, but fast enough that Lydia gasped and stumbled backward. He grabbed her wrist with a force that made her wince, dragging her closer. Where is it? He demanded. Where is the recording really? Lydia's voice cracked. I told you, I threw the phone away. He yanked her forward. You're lying. Just like all the others. Others. The word echoed through me, vile and heavy. Before she could speak again, Marcus's free hand slipped into her coat pocket. Lydia twisted, trying to pull away, but he was stronger. Much stronger. His fingers wrapped around something inside the pocket, and when he pulled his hand out, my breath stopped. Her phone. A slim, silver device, shaking in his grip as if absorbing her fear. No, Marcus, please, don't. Lydia's voice broke into desperation. Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned, wound his arm back, and with a force fueled by rage and fear, he hurled the phone into the lake. It arced through the air, a small glint of silver against the gray sky, before plunging into the water with a muted splash. Lydia let out a strangled cry, collapsing to her knees. Why would you? Because you don't get to decide what ruins me. His voice was low, final, chilling. Silence followed. Heavy. Terrifying. Lydia sobbed quietly, clutching her wrist where his grip had reddened the skin. The lake rippled softly, swallowing the evidence of everything she had tried to escape. I felt my world collapse inward. Not just because of what Marcus had done to her, but because of what he had kept from me. Our entire marriage balanced on lies I hadn't even known existed. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands shook. The cold seeped into my skin and bones. I had one choice now, reveal myself and risk everything, or hide in the shadows and let Marcus spiral into something far worse. Lydia lifted her head at that moment, eyes filled with terror and betrayal. Marcus, what are you going to do to me now? His silence was more frightening than any threat. I knew I couldn't stay hidden much longer. Because whatever Marcus decided next, it wasn't going to end peacefully. The scream tore through the stillness like a blade, sharp enough to slice through Elena's paralysis. One moment Lydia was fighting Marcus on the slick planks of the pier, and the next her body tilted backward, arms flailing for balance that wasn't there. Elena watched in horror as Lydia's heels slipped, her silhouette pitching toward the lake's black mouth. Then came the unmistakable sound, a hollow, violent splash that sent icy droplets into the morning air. The ripples spread outward like a warning, the lake swallowing her without mercy. For a heartbeat Elena couldn't move. Her mind rejected what she had seen, reshaping it into something less monstrous, something that didn't involve the man she had loved for 7 years letting a terrified young woman drown at his feet. But the truth stayed fixed, unmoving, refusing to blur. Marcus didn't leap after her. He didn't shout for help. He simply stared at the water, jaw clenched, breath hissing between his teeth as if the lake had stolen something from him personally. Elena snapped forward. Her boots hammered the ground as she sprinted toward the pier, adrenaline overriding fear. Lydia's head surfaced for a brief, desperate second, the young woman's arms thrashing against the brutal cold. Help! Lydia gasped, voice cracking. Please! The rest dissolved into a choking sputter. Elena lunged closer, but Marcus's sudden movement froze her mid-stride. He turned sharply, scanning the trees with the ferocity of a cornered predator, nostrils flaring, shoulders rigid. He'd heard her. Elena dove behind a cluster of brush, breath stuttering, hands trembling against the damp soil. Through a lattice of branches, she saw Lydia slip beneath the surface once more, her final cry swallowed by the lake's unforgiving silence. The water stilled as if nothing had happened at all, its calmness an insult. Elena bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, forcing herself not to leap out and scream Marcus's name. Marcus stepped to the edge of the pier and crouched, but not with concern. He leaned over the water, watching the last ripples fade, tapping the wood with 2 fingers, irritated, calculating. Then he exhaled, long and steady, as though a problem had been resolved rather than created. Only after that did he stand and survey the area again, his eyes colder than the lake itself. Elena suppressed a shiver as he paced the shoreline, scanning for the source of the noise he'd heard earlier. His footsteps crunched slowly across gravel, coming closer to Elena's hiding spot. She pressed deeper into the shadows, flattening herself, praying he would overlook the thicket. Her pulse thudded so loudly she feared it might betray her. Marcus paused just a few feet away, brow furrowed, head tilted with suspicion sharpened into precision. Then a gust of wind rattled branches on the opposite side of the cabin, drawing his attention. He turned away and stalked toward the sound, leaving Elena to sag silently into the dirt. When he disappeared around the corner, Elena crawled backward, muscles stiff with cold and terror. She needed to move, think, breathe, anything other than watch the place where Lydia had vanished. The image of the young woman's pleading eyes wouldn't leave her. Lydia hadn't been an affair or a moment of weakness. She had been a liability. And Marcus had handled her like business. Elena rose shakily and scanned the woods. Marcus was circling the cabin now, checking paths, listening for movement. He was hunting. Not for Lydia, but for whoever had witnessed her fall. If he found her, Elena knew the lake would claim a second victim before sunrise. She wiped the mud from her palms, swallowed her panic, and slipped deeper into the trees, careful not to leave a trail he could follow. The branches closed around her like a warning as she moved farther from the cabin, and closer to the truth she could no longer ignore. Somewhere ahead, she heard a twig snap, and she wasn't sure if it came from Marcus or someone else. Elena ran through the trees, branches whipping at her arms, Lydia's last cry echoing behind her like a phantom. The forest felt tighter now, as if it had inhaled with her fear and refused to let it go. Every snapped twig sounded like Marcus's boots, every rustle a hand reaching for her. She didn't stop until the cabin's sloping roof emerged through the foliage, its windows dark, silent, watching. The place she once considered a retreat now felt like a trap waiting to spring shut. Her hands shook as she climbed the porch steps and shoved through the door. The cabin interior was cold, but familiar, the leather couch Marcus insisted on, the fireplace he never lit, the perfectly arranged decor he never actually used. Elena stumbled toward the kitchen counter where Marcus kept the satellite phone for emergencies. She grabbed it, dialed instinctively, and pressed it to her ear. Nothing. Not static, not ringing, just dead silence. Heart slamming, she moved to her own phone and tried again. Still nothing. She lifted it toward the window. No service. She turned on the Wi-Fi hub. No connection. For a moment she thought the storm clouds overhead were to blame, but then she saw it. The small, metallic device mounted discreetly beneath the window frame. A jammer. Industrial grade. Operational. A cold wave spread across her spine. Marcus had installed it. He once joked that privacy was priceless, especially when he needed to unplug. She had smiled, believing it was another eccentricity of a billionaire who valued solitude. She never questioned why a simple fishing cabin needed military-level signal blocking. She never questioned any of Marcus's choices. Until now. Elena dropped heavily onto the couch, breath tremoring. The man she had watched moments earlier, the man who let Lydia drown without hesitation, didn't feel like the husband she knew. Except maybe he was. Maybe she had simply refused to see him clearly. Memories surfaced, slow and sharp, as if someone were drawing them from a locked drawer. She remembered the first time Marcus raised his voice at her. It was during their second year of marriage, when she had asked about a late-night meeting he swore he never had. He'd laughed at her, accused her of being paranoid, insecure, overly emotional. She had apologized then, feeling foolish, not realizing that twisting guilt into her was his way of winning. She remembered how he dismissed her concerns about his overseas accounts, calling her too sensitive for finance, while patting her hand like a child's. She remembered how he monitored her spending to help, How he criticized her friends for influencing her too much, how he insisted she quit her job so she could focus on the household, though the household required nothing except her silence. Gaslighting had been Marcus's art form. Control his masterpiece. She had mistaken possessiveness for devotion. She had mistaken secrecy for stress. She had mistaken danger for love. Elena wiped her face with trembling fingers. Lydia hadn't been the first woman Marcus intimidated. She had merely been the first to fight back with evidence. And Marcus, relentless, proud, always needing to maintain his spotless public image, couldn't allow anyone to threaten the empire he built from offshore lies and hidden accounts. If Lydia had been a liability, what did that make Elena now? A cold certainty settled in her chest. Marcus wouldn't just walk away after realizing someone was hiding nearby. He would search. He would investigate every corner of the property. He would follow any trail. And eventually he would come back to the cabin. Elena stood and backed away from the windows, pulse roaring in her ears. She couldn't stay here. She needed a plan, fast, silent, smart, before Marcus returned and sealed her fate with the same calm finality he'd shown on the pier. A sudden crunch of gravel outside snapped her attention to the doorway. Someone was approaching. Elena's hands shook as she moved quietly through the cabin, scanning the familiar interior for anything that could give her leverage, anything that could protect her. Her eyes settled on Marcus's office door, slightly ajar as if inviting her to uncover a truth he had intended to hide. She crept closer, heart hammering against her ribcage, and pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and expensive leather, the scent punctuated by the lingering trace of Marcus's cologne, sharp, clean, inescapable. Elena's gaze fell on the polished desk, organized to perfection. Papers stacked meticulously. A golden pen set in its stand. And then, almost like it had been left there for her, a small black drawer partially open. Her curiosity overrode caution. She crouched, fingers trembling as she pulled it fully open. Inside lay a backup phone, identical to the one Marcus had thrown into the lake, but with a small, personalized case. A label on the back read, Lydia. Her stomach twisted into knots. She picked it up, sliding her thumb over the screen. It was unlocked. Panic and anticipation warred inside her, but she had to know. She tapped the recordings folder and found dozens of files, labeled with dates, times, and cryptic phrases. One file, marked USB check, caught her attention immediately. She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room, calm but venomous. You think you can just disappear with it? That USB belongs to me. Everything on it belongs to me. If anyone finds it, he paused, the weight of his threat hanging in the air. If anyone finds it, you know what will happen. Don't test me, Lydia. Lydia's voice quivered beneath his, fragile and pleading. I didn't touch it. I swear, Marcus. Don't swear at me, he interrupted. I've built this empire on trust, discipline, and fear. You betray that, and there's no forgiveness. Elena's chest tightened. Her mind raced as she pieced together what she already suspected. The USB wasn't just a piece of hardware. It contained evidence, financial irregularities, perhaps even criminal acts. Marcus's empire, the facade of perfection, was hiding something lethal. She barely had time to process the implications before a shadow fell across the doorway. Her body froze. Marcus had returned. He stepped inside, voice low and measured, muttering as if talking to himself. Someone else was at the lake. Can't let anyone interfere. His eyes scanned the office with surgical precision, lingering on the desk, the drawer, the phone in her hands. Elena dropped to the floor silently, crawling under the slight gap of the floorboards near the wall. She held her breath as Marcus moved closer, his shoes clicking against the hardwood. He crouched, inspecting the corner where she had been moments before, muttering to himself about the disturbance near the pier and the lake. Who's been snooping here? He muttered under his breath. He leaned closer to the drawer, pulling it open and running his fingers across the desk, as if searching for a clue. I should have installed better security. Someone's prying. Elena pressed herself lower, heart pounding, clutching Lydia's phone beneath her chin. Every movement of Marcus above her felt like a hammer striking the floor, each breath a threat. He muttered about locks, alarms, and cameras, shaking his head as he stood and moved toward the doorway, his attention diverted by a noise outside. Once he exited, Elena exhaled, shaking violently. The phone was still warm from use, a silent witness to the conversation she had just heard. Her mind reeled with possibilities. The USB, the recordings, Marcus's crimes, and now, her own life in imminent danger. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Whatever Marcus was guarding, whatever he feared the most, she now held a small fragment of it in her hands. Elena pressed her ear to the floorboards, listening to the faint sounds of the lake outside. A decision had to be made. The USB, Marcus, Lydia, all of it, were connected, and she had no time left to hesitate. The shadows of the cabin pressed close, and the next step she took would determine whether she survived the morning or became another victim of Marcus's empire. Rain began to fall, light at first, tapping the roof like a warning. Elena pressed her face against the cabin window, watching the gray sky darken as the storm gathered strength. The storm was her chance. Marcus was still searching, still pacing the edges of the cabin and shoreline, muttering to himself about the disturbance at the lake. If she moved carefully, silently, she could slip outside without him noticing. Heart hammering, she grabbed a waterproof jacket from the coat rack and darted toward the door, boots splashing lightly in the growing puddles. The wind whipped her hair across her face, mingling with the cold drizzle, but she didn't stop. She followed the shoreline toward the dock, each step counting, each shadow a potential threat. Lightning flickered, illuminating the scene in brief, stark clarity, the bobbing luxury boat, still tied to the pier, glinting wetly under the storm. Elena climbed onto the dock, careful not to make a sound, and approached the vessel. Her fingers found the hidden latch Marcus had installed under the deck hatch, a small, almost invisible panel he likely believed no one would notice. Her pulse roared in her ears, hands trembling as she pried it open. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was a slim black case. She pulled it out and flipped it open. The missing USB sat inside. Her stomach twisted at the sight. This small object, almost insignificant in size, carried the weight of lives, fortunes, and secrets. She slid it into her pocket, feeling its cold, hard edges press against her palm, a reminder of what she had just uncovered. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating her surroundings, and she ducked instinctively. Pulling her phone from the pocket, she tried to turn it on, but the jammers still rendered it useless. She would need to leave the property entirely to use it safely. First, she had to understand the scope of what she had. The USB was labeled simply, Ward Corp, Confidential. Elena didn't yet know what files were inside, but she imagined the worst and found she was right. Marcus's offshore accounts. False identities. Hidden investments tied to shell companies. And worse, employee records. A few files bore names she recognized from the company's internal memos, all marked as terminated under investigation, but the corresponding notes hinted at something more sinister. Accidental or otherwise. Employees who had stumbled onto secrets, disappeared, or been silenced quietly. Her mind raced. Lydia hadn't been the first to uncover Marcus's crimes. And now it was clear, with cold precision, that she might not be the last. Each name, each document, each recording was a thread in a web Marcus had spun, a web meant to trap anyone who threatened him. The storm intensified, rain lashing her face, thunder rolling across the lake. She crouched low in the boat, glancing back toward the cabin. Marcus hadn't noticed yet, but he would. And once he did, he would stop at nothing. Elena's stomach churned as she realized the full weight of her position. She had proof, undeniable proof, of not just financial crimes, but lives manipulated and destroyed in pursuit of power. She understood now that Marcus Ward wasn't just dangerous. He was meticulous, controlling, and willing to eliminate anyone who threatened his empire. Her thoughts returned to Lydia, to the splash, to the frightened voice pleading for mercy. The realization hit with chilling clarity. Marcus had survived decades of scrutiny, silencing those who got too close. Lydia had been lucky to survive, barely. She hadn't been the first. And if Elena wasn't careful, she wouldn't be the last. She clenched the USB in her fist, rain soaking her jacket, and pressed herself against the boat's hull. Her next steps had to be precise. She had a weapon now, a fragile lifeline in the form of data that could destroy Marcus, but only if she survived long enough to wield it. The storm roared louder, the wind pushing her forward, forcing her from hesitation to action. She had what she needed. Now she had to escape the man she once thought she knew, before he realized she held the one thing he feared most. Elena had barely begun to slip back toward the shoreline when movement in the shadows froze her in place. A figure emerged from the trees, tall, imposing, familiar. Marcus. His coat was soaked from the storm, droplets running down his sleeves like small streams. His eyes, sharp and cold, locked on hers instantly, and the familiar calm she once trusted twisted into a predator's stare. "Elena," he said, voice deceptively soft, like honey poured over steel. "What are you doing out here? You shouldn't be wandering alone in this weather." Her pulse surged. "I could ask you the same thing," she shot back, clutching the USB tight against her chest. "Why are you threatening people? Why did Lydia almost?" "Almost," he interrupted, stepping closer, hands raised in mock surrender. "She slipped, that's all. An accident. She's fine, isn't she? And you should stop imagining things. You're letting paranoia run wild." The words hit like a slap, twisting something deep in her chest. But instead of fear, anger surged. Anger at the lies, the control, the years of manipulation she had excused as love. She stood straighter, shoulders squared despite the storm, despite the cold rain plastering her hair to her forehead. "You call that fine?" Elena said, voice trembling with fury. "I saw you, Marcus. I saw what you did. And now I know everything." His brow furrowed, expression sharpening, the predator surfacing beneath the mask. "Everything? You've seen nothing, Elena. You're imagining conspiracy where there is none. You force me into corners with your accusations. I have to protect myself, protect us." "You protect yourself by almost killing someone?" she spat. "By lying, by hiding, by controlling every part of everyone's lives around you?" Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line, then curled slightly. "You think you understand me. You think you've uncovered some grand secret, but you only see pieces of a picture you'll never comprehend. You want to make me the villain?" "You are the villain," she said, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "For years, I excused your temper, your secrecy, your cold manipulations. I blamed myself. I thought I was too sensitive, too weak, too demanding. But I've seen you now. The man I married doesn't exist. This version of you, the one who threatened Lydia, who lied to me, who built his empire on fear, is real. And I will not be afraid anymore." Marcus's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint of disbelief flashing. "Afraid? You think fear is what controls me? You're mistaken. I do what must be done. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. You're too naive, too sentimental. You force me to act in ways that are." "Stop!" Elena screamed, the roar of the storm beneath them echoing her fury. She stepped forward, lifting the USB between them like a weapon and a shield. "I will not be your pawn. I will not be manipulated. I will not watch anyone else die because of your control." For a long moment, Marcus studied her, silent, the wind tugging at his soaked coat. Then he exhaled slowly, a hiss like steam from a kettle, the tension between them crackling in the air. "You've changed," he said finally, voice low, almost admiring in its menace. "I didn't think you had it in you. But be careful, Elena. Understanding me doesn't mean you can survive me." Her heart pounded, fear and defiance intertwining. She knew he was right in one sense. Understanding Marcus Ward meant knowing he was dangerous, perhaps lethal. But she also knew she had never been this aware, this awake, this unwilling to be controlled. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the USB in her hand, the lake behind them, and the line between her past obedience and her present defiance. And in that flash of light, Elena realized she had taken her first true step toward survival. The storm had not let up. Rain hammered down in relentless sheets, blurring the line between lake and sky. Elena pressed herself against the edge of the dock, drenched and shivering, but her hands were steady around the USB. Her fingers ached from gripping it, but she could not let go. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. A sudden flare of orange light cut through the darkness. Elena had managed it, an emergency flare tucked away in the cabin, a desperate measure she had triggered as she ran along the shoreline. The flare's glow reflected in the rippling water, slicing through the rain like a signal from salvation. Marcus's head whipped toward the light. His pupils dilated, rage twisting his face into something monstrous. "No!" he screamed and lunged at her. His hands shot for the USB, fingers scraping against hers as she braced. The cold metal felt heavy, but it was her weapon, her lifeline, the proof of everything he had hidden. "You think you can destroy me?" Marcus growled, voice low and terrifying. "You're making a mistake. You always make mistakes." Elena shoved him back, her boots slipping on the wet wood. "I'm not afraid anymore," she shouted. The words were not just for him. They were for herself, for Lydia, for every person who had been crushed under his control. Marcus grabbed her wrist, twisting violently, trying to wrench the USB from her hand. Rain sluiced over them both, soaking clothes and hair, turning the struggle into a slippery, dangerous dance. Elena's legs burned as she dug heels into the pier, refusing to let him pull her into the water. Lightning illuminated the scene, a mirror of Lydia's final moments at the lake, but this time Elena would not falter. She twisted her body, elbowed Marcus in the ribs, and the force broke his grip momentarily. The USB remained clutched against her chest. "You can't stop me!" Marcus roared, regaining his hold, but Elena shoved him again, this time with every ounce of strength and fury she possessed. The dock shuddered beneath them. Rain stung her eyes, mixing with tears she hadn't realized she had left to cry. Then came the sound she had been waiting for, the low rumble of engines over the wind and storm. A rescue boat, drawn by the flare, cut through the churning lake toward them. Its lights flickered blue and red across the water, reflections scattering in glittering shards on the waves. Marcus's face paled, but only slightly. He tried one last desperate grab for the USB, lunging with reckless fury. Elena sidestepped, using his momentum to push him closer to the edge. Water sloshed against the pier, and for a fleeting second, she saw the reflection of his rage against the dark lake, a glimpse of the monster she had feared and finally confronted. The authorities reached the dock, shouting commands over the wind. "Step back! Drop the weapon!" Marcus froze, the reality of witnesses and consequences crashing over him. Elena stumbled back but kept the USB close, panting, soaked, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The rain plastered her hair to her forehead, but she no longer felt cold. Blue lights reflected across the lake, the storm's roar blending with sirens and shouted orders. Elena allowed herself to collapse onto the wet wood, finally letting her shoulders sink. She breathed, deep and ragged, the first breath in hours that was hers alone. Marcus struggled, shouting and thrashing, but the authorities were already restraining him. Elena watched, still trembling, as the man she had once loved was finally bound by the law. The lake, the storm, the fear, all of it reflected in the calming ripples beneath the flashing lights. Elena's hands loosened around the USB just enough to breathe. She was free. For the first time in a long time, she could finally exhale. The storm had begun to ease, leaving a cold, heavy mist hovering over the lake. Elena sat on the dock, soaked through and trembling, but not from the rain. Her hands still clutched the USB, now a lifeline and a burden. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Marcus Ward, her husband, the man whose charm and calculated warmth had once lulled her into trust, was restrained, shouting futilely as officers led him away. The reality of it settled over her slowly, like the mist curling across the water. She glanced at the lake, the dark expanse still and reflective. Lydia's absence remained a jagged shadow on the scene, a reminder of how close she had come to death, how close she had come to losing everything. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart slow from its frantic pace, trying to make sense of the torrent of emotions, fear, relief, anger, sorrow, and a strange, hollow sense of liberation. The officers approached, careful and precise, giving her space but watching her like she might collapse. One of them, a young woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, knelt beside her. "Ma'am," she said, voice steady despite the chaos, "can you tell us what happened?" Elena swallowed hard, her throat tight. The words rushed out, haltingly at first, then with increasing clarity. She recounted Marcus's threats, Lydia's near drowning, the flare, and the USB, the evidence that revealed everything. She explained the offshore accounts, the forced NDAs, the employees who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The officers listened without interruption, scribbling notes, occasionally exchanging glances that confirmed her story was more than just a domestic dispute. The weight of truth was both a relief and a terror. She had exposed Marcus's empire of control, but she also realized the danger was far from over. Names, evidence, witnesses, everything she now possessed made her a target. She had survived the lake, but surviving Marcus's world meant she would have to stay vigilant. A small voice inside her reminded her of Lydia. The young assistant's courage, the way she had fought to protect herself, had inspired Elena's own resistance. Elena closed her eyes, imagining Lydia emerging from the lake, coughing and shaking, alive but scarred by the night's events. The thought fueled her resolve. If Lydia had faced Marcus and survived, she could too, and she would not allow anyone else to fall victim to him. As the mist thickened, Elena finally allowed herself to stand. She felt the USB heavy in her pocket, yet its weight was not just burden, it was power. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And for the first time, she felt capable of using it to dismantle the empire Marcus had built with fear, manipulation, and violence. The lake reflected the flashing blue and red lights of the authorities' vehicles, and for the first time, Elena did not flinch at their glow. She drew in a deep breath, tasting the cold air, tasting freedom. The storm had passed, leaving only the aftermath, and the clarity of what must come next. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, cutting through the quiet, and Elena felt a flicker of hope. The night had revealed everything, and though her path forward was uncertain and dangerous, she had survived. She was no longer a pawn in Marcus Ward's game. She was a witness, a bearer of truth, and for the first time, entirely her own. Elena turned from the lake, the dock, and the chaos. Her eyes hardened with determination. The next step was clear. She would make sure the world knew who Marcus Ward really was. And she would make sure justice reached everyone he had harmed. The dawn broke slowly over the lake, pale light filtering through the dissipating mist. Elena stood at the edge of the dock, USB clutched tightly in one hand, her other hand brushing the damp strands of hair from her face. The storm had passed, but its residue lingered in the air, the scent of wet earth, the cold that seeped into her bones, and the echo of chaos that had defined the night. Marcus was gone, restrained in a police car and flanked by officers whose expressions were hard but controlled. His gaze had followed her one last time, eyes dark with fury and disbelief, as if he could not comprehend that she had survived, that she had uncovered the truth, that she held the weapon that could unravel his meticulously constructed empire. Elena's hands shook slightly as she slipped the USB into her pocket. This small object, which had caused so much fear and violence, now represented clarity, justice, and power. She felt the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. She had the evidence of offshore accounts, illegal shell corporations, employee disappearances, and coercion. Names of those who had been silenced, buried under the guise of corporate accidents, stared back at her from the digital files. She had to ensure their stories were heard. The authorities approached again, offering support, questions, and the kind of calm professionalism that contrasted sharply with the chaos Marcus had sown. Elena recounted everything once more, meticulously, without hesitation this time. She spoke of Lydia's near death, the threats, the gaslighting, and the empire of control Marcus had built through fear. The officers nodded gravely, clearly understanding the scope of what had been at stake. Her thoughts drifted to Lydia. She had survived her own ordeal, but the young assistant would carry the scars of Marcus's manipulations for a lifetime. Elena silently vowed to find her, to offer comfort and reassurance, to tell her she had survived, and to remind her that she was not alone in facing what Marcus had built. Elena's phone buzzed faintly. Service had returned. She ignored it for a moment, focusing instead on the lake. Its surface, once violent and chaotic, now reflected calm light, broken only by the ripples from the retreating storm. She felt a sense of closure in the rhythm of the water, the way it had witnessed both destruction and survival. She turned to the approaching police boat, its lights cutting across the water in steady blue beams, and realized that the night had done more than reveal Marcus's crimes. It had revealed her own strength. She had faced fear, deception, and power, and had emerged intact, determined, and fully aware of her own agency. The USB would be the key to dismantling Marcus's empire, to exposing the lies, the manipulation, and the danger he had posed to anyone who crossed him. She would not allow his carefully curated facade to protect him any longer. Every file, every recorded threat, every suppressed account would be brought to light. Justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. Elena breathed deeply, letting the chill of the morning settle into her lungs. She felt tears begin to slip down her cheeks, not of fear or grief, but of relief and resolve. She had survived. She had fought. And she had taken the first steps toward ensuring Marcus Ward would never threaten another life in the shadows of his empire. As she stepped toward the boat that would take her from the dock and back to safety, Elena allowed herself one final glance at the lake. The reflections of the blue lights shimmered across the water, mirroring the clarity she now felt inside. The storm was gone, but its lessons remained. She tightened her grip on the USB and whispered to herself, voice steady and resolute, "No more lies. No more fear. This ends now." The boat's engine roared to life, cutting through the mist and carrying her forward. The night had revealed the truth. The lake had witnessed the struggle, the confrontation, and the survival. And Elena, soaked, shaken, and unbroken, was finally free.